Nation. From the second that I heard the beautiful, elegant, insightful, humorous voice of one Chuck Klosterman, I don't know how to even put this book into words. Football by Chuck Klosterman, it's brilliant. I guess the best way to start, Chuck, is two things. Like, as I'm listening to you describe this sport, and like you say at the top, it's not like a love letter to football, but it really is. I don't do drugs, but I do like whiskey, and I feel like it's like when you have a lot of whiskey and you're like staring deep into your soul, you stare deep into your football soul listening to this book, reading this book. Everybody should do both. I mean, you really do look at a sport that's a way of life in a completely new way, a fresh way, and it's going to make you think at a deep level by the end. And also, the other way is on my phone as I'm listening to it, because I just love a million parts of it. I'm screenshotting constantly. So right now, my photo album is nothing but my 3 kids and the little audible picture of these 2 football players bashing into each other.
Well,
there's just so many parts I don't want to forget.
That's very nice of you to say. I appreciate that. You know, it's an interesting thing. When you write a book like that, it's just called Football or whatever. I had some thought maybe like, will this be sort of too traditional or too staid? But your reaction makes me feel like maybe not. So that makes me feel good. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I'm sure you've been asked this, 1.7 million times on the 1.7 million podcasts and radio spots you've done. But really, folks would love to know, like, what's the impetus for applying your unique brain to this sport? I think everybody out there has probably read you for a long, long time.
Well, this is just something I've been thinking about for most of my life, unconsciously, in a way. I mean, when I was a little kid, when I was 9 years old or whatever, I wasn't imagining someday I would, write a book about Roger Staubach or whatever. That never really was what you don't think that. But at some point in my career, I did make a decision that I did want to do a sports book. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed kind of inescapable to have the subject be football. If you're going to write about culture, if you're going to write about a sport that sort of impacts society around it, if you want to talk about things that sort of, really cross over all demographics and kind of transcend the idea of just being something that people watch on TV or attend live, football is the obvious choice. So, like I said, it's like I've unconsciously thought about it for 45 years or whatever. I've consciously thought about doing a book like this probably for 10 to 20. And then at one point, I just actually did,
The first sentence is an all-timer. This is a book about football written for people who don't exist. I can see that this is not the savviest business decision I've ever made. It's also a little bit misleading. But really, start there then, Chuck, because by the end of it, it does get a little, gloomy and doomy, maybe a little extreme. You're blunt, though, with the way these different forces are interacting with the sport, that this sport, as we know it, football right now, the NFL right now, I forgot how X amount of years, was like 5-6 decades into the future, this thing is going to take a dark turn.
So, it is interesting because that part of the book is certainly the aspect that people sort of are most fixated on. At the very beginning of the book, I note that I do perceive this future where football it's not that it's going to be gone entirely, but it's going to really recede from the center of the culture. And then there's that essay at the end of the book where I describe how this could happen or may happen. Now, in between is like just actually sort of like, these are all the things about football that I love and I think about all the time, But I understand why this idea of football sort of being doomed or whatever is so just it's like mind-blowing to people in a way because they just can't imagine. It's strange. They can't even imagine the idea that something that's popular now won't be popular after they're dead. That's how omnipresent football is. That almost like people think I'm crazy for suggesting that the world might be different in 50 years. But I think in 2 generations, I think that's kind of, the year I use about 2070, I do think that football is going to play a very different role in society, And part of the reason I wrote this book is because when that begins to happen, from that kind of point forward, there's going to be this belief that, we have to understand why this thing was once so popular. People are going to retroactively try to describe what made football popular and also what made it, in their mind, made it fail. And I just know it's going to be wrong because it always is. Like the natural tendency of any person when talking about the relatively recent past is to project our present understanding of what life is like onto history. And that's just never works. You have to kind of write about something while it's still alive in the living present. So that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and I know that world, Chuck, too, where it's like you're going on these shows, and that's going to be a headline because people can't really wrap their minds around it. But this book is full of why we are all obsessed with football, why you've been obsessed with football. I really like the essay on Texas. Right, and there's one point you transition from six-man football to Creed in the halftime show, and looking at the 3 different Friday Night Lights, and that kind of seeps into what led you into football. And this, love isn't even a strong enough word, but your admiration for Roger Staubach. How did he really capture your imagination? Because I bet you there's a lot of people watching and listening. They've got that one figure. Probably a quarterback who seemed larger than life. I mean, for me, it was Brett Favre, like 2nd, 3rd grade. I mean, he could do no wrong. I mean, he was Paul Bunyan on a football field. And, just kind of detail what gravitated you toward a quarterback who you didn't really watch his peak in real time. And you mentioned that scene in Friday Night Lights with the little kid to kind of get into that.
Well, yeah, in many ways, Roger Staubach really would kind of belongs, if you say somebody belongs to a period, he would belong to the period just kind of preceding me. Because, he retired, I believe I was just finishing up 2nd grade when he retired. So the amount that I actually saw him play is small. But I'm very much of the belief that whoever your hero is when you're 8 or 9 is kind of your hero for life. I think it's very strange for an adult man to see someone as a hero, even if they're doing heroic things. It just seems strange to do that. But when you're a kid, you need heroes, right? You need sort of this idea that there is something that sort of to you represents what kind of adult you want to be. And obviously I didn't use that language when I was that age, but I think that's what was going on. Now I saw Roger Staubach, my dad loved him, my older brothers thought he was great. Even the relatives in my family who hated the Cowboys seemed to begrudgingly admit how clutch he was. Yeah. And there's things when you're young. I was raised Catholic, so just the idea that he was Catholic meant something. There are things about him that I think as you grow up or as I matured, I was almost taught to sort of see as uncool. Like going to the Naval Academy, going to Vietnam or whatever, so willingly or whatever. I think that there was a period, when I was in college or wherever, where I was like, well, I'm into countercultural ideas. I should be against that. But the part of me that's 8, the part of me that's, the little boy inside the man or whatever, still has those same kind of values. So Roger Staubach has never stopped being my favorite football player. I mean, he still is now. If someone asked me, who's your favorite football player, I would be like, well, you're talking about, like who's playing now? I guess Lamar Jackson. But if we're really saying who my favorite football player is, it's Roger Staubach. And that will sort of be it'll always be that way. Like it's an irreplaceable thing. Larry Bird was close to that. He kind of came, but that even was a little bit later. Like I was a little bit older. Like Staubach I was into when I barely understood the concept of downs. Like all the rules of football or something, it would be very difficult for a kid that age to even sit through an entire football game. But I knew I loved him. So I could watch 10 minutes of a football game and then go outside and play for 2 hours pretending to be him,
And that was in the chapter, My Own Prison. I mean, each chapter, each essay is electric. I mean, you can't put this down. You can't hit pause. There's a part in there where you're getting into Friday Night Lights, and talking about this show. I actually never saw the TV show. I love the movie and love the book, obviously. But you put it so perfectly. You said, what the show got right was something... But what the show got right was something the original book had captured with agonizing brilliance. In places like this, every human experience is contextualized through its correlation with football, even and perhaps especially if those actions are attempts to create distance from the sport. You can love football or you can hate football, but you can't be disinterested. You can think it's stupid, but it's something you have to think about. It will shape your life against your will. Equally palpable was the message that playing high school football is the apex of any normal Texas male's life. Like, I listened to that. You made me think of my wife a few times. Like, my wife, Gina, she's downstairs watching our youngest. I don't think she knows first down from second down from third down. She has been around football her whole life. Doesn't know really much at all about it. I feel like that Henry Winkler in The Waterboy, like, when he's talking to him, you're around football your whole life, Bobby. At some point, did you watch the game? But even Gina would sit here and say, like, that it's central to her life, to my life, to everybody's life. Like, there's really nothing that powerful in America. I'm trying to think of anything that compares, but I guess that's why you wrote the book. But it was that, and then that at the end of the book, you talk about eating a bowl of cereal at the end of the day before bed, and creating fictional characters. But like there is something special about this sport, isn't there?
A strange thing about me, or maybe just the way of nature, the nature of how football works. But that is because a few people have asked about that. They were like, "Well, what are we supposed to take from that part of the book?" Where I do have this thing where very often at night I'll be like eating a bowl of cereal at midnight or whatever. Everyone else is asleep, and I find myself sort of imagining these little like fictional football scenarios, it'll be some situation like, will there be like a running back, a senior in high school who's a great running back, but he recognizes that there's a sophomore coming up who's better than him. So then he has to sort of make this calculation in his mind. Do I transition to receiver because it'll be good for the team, or do I fight this kid off or whatever? Do I see, and they end up never kind of coming to fruition.
Right.
I will get just fixated on these weird details like, well, this senior running back, he's more of an all-down back, an all-purpose back, and the sophomore is just a speed back. So maybe he'll just be so I'll get into these kind of specifics of what I'm imagining, building these fake characters, and pretty soon, like, it's 12:45 and I just go to bed. I don't, like, it's, but like you talk about your wife, okay, you do this, football is your life, kind of, you do this podcast, this Substack, I'm sure you're watching football every Sunday and most Saturdays and Monday night and Thursday, so it's there in her life all the time, but it's such a dense and complicated sport that you can be around football a lot and not understand any of it. Like, I like it is a very difficult sport to sort of like pick up, like, because you made the conscious decision to do so. Like, it's really hard for someone to be like, I'm going to get into football this year. Other sports you can kind of do that with. You can say, like, this year I'm going to follow baseball or whatever. I'll just but football, you almost have to sort of be indoctrinated into this culture over a long period of time just to have an understanding of how it works,
It's so true. And what popped to mind for me and it was cracking me up. I mean, you laid out like 6 or 7 different stories that you'll create over a bowl. I'm picturing you in your kitchen. Just, do you have cereal with milk, by the way?
Oh, totally.
You do? Okay.
Yes.
I'm just a sicko, I guess. I can't do milk with cereal.
You don't put milk in cereal?
I don't know. It's always the sogginess. It kind of gives me the creeps, Chuck. I can't do it. I know I'm the weirdo. Maybe I'll start to do this. Just create
I'm not
little storylines in the kitchen. But like for me, it's to this day, like late 30s, I'll have these recurring dreams. I played quarterback at Ellicottville here in the southern tier of Western New York, and we lost to Oakfield, Alabama. The game before states my junior year, Randolph my senior year, and it's like I'm back in that game, back in that moment, one more shot. And this time, right, throw the winning touchdown, win the game, and eventually you wake up and you're disappointed. But that will happen again and again.
Actually, can I ask you a question? So when you have dreams of being in high school playing, is it like you're yourself, or is it like you're watching it on television? How realistic is it? Is it actually simulations of things that literally happened, but the outcome is different?
It's not a direct simulation, but I am in it. Like, I am absolutely
like you're
playing.
Seeing it from your eyes.
Yes.
When you're in the pocket, you're seeing the pocket around you. Okay, so it's like...
Totally. I mean, and here we are, like, later in life, a lot's changed. Why in the hell am I dreaming about this thing still? Right? Like, that's the power of football.
Well, not just that, it's the uniqueness of the experience. Because, like, let's say you had a similar experience with baseball. You had been, say, a big-time shortstop or whatever, and you'd probably be playing, recreational softball. You would still be able to sort of throw a baseball around or play amateur baseball with a kid or whatever, like, in a way that is kind of close to it. The experience you had with football can never be replicated. Because you just can't play football recreationally. Like you can play 4-on-4 in the yard or whatever, touch football. That really has very little relationship to actual football outside of the ball itself. I mean, football is an exclusionary thing. It's a small percentage of people who have that experience. And I think if you do have that experience, it's hard to divorce yourself from the memory. Because it's so unlike everything else in life.
You do such a masterful job of objectively bringing this sport to life and why it's different, right? Because you get the book is a slow and steady build toward the question, right? Like with the violence, and I don't want to butcher it. The line that you use often is, why do we let, or should we let strangers play a dangerous sport? Did I say that right?
Well, it's the idea is like, should strangers be allowed to do something that is very dangerous to themselves, that we will be to some degree complicit in because we're watching it. We're sort of creating the superstructure. And my answer ultimately is yes, but it's a complicated thing, And it has to be strangers. It has to kind of deal with the idea of agency, and is agency real? Like, it's very easy to say, like, well, every football player makes a decision to play. But in some ways they don't. I mean, there are some people, I think, who are raised in a situation where it's absolutely impossible for them to have any better life than the life football would afford them. And not just financially, socially. Like, that any status or identity they have would come from their, playing linebacker in high school and being awesome, and then going to college and, sort of being recognized as that. So does that person really have agency? If there is no option even as close to that in terms of what you can be fulfilled, is that really your choice? And that is a hard question, I mean, there are parts of this book, I suppose, that are kind of closer to kind of like philosophy in a way. But at the same time, I do feel good that I think that the book really is about football. Like, it talks about these other things, but always through the lens of this game,
And I'm a football lover. Like, the second my son, he's 4.5 now, wants to put on the pads and play, I'm going to let him play. I mean, it made me who I am as a person. It shaped me who I am as a person. But my point being, like, your book, it's not this, like, assault on the sport, nor is it this warm embrace of, do it and don't think twice. You really lay it out perfectly, like I said. And what I come back to, too, is Chris Borland, he was one of the first players in their prime
to retire so early.
1 year, right? He was linebacker for the Wisconsin Badgers when I lived in Wisconsin. He's incredible. Not that big, but a torpedo. Was really good, I believe, that rookie season with San Francisco. And then, boom, he's done. It's the number one story in America. A couple years later, we got together in Atlanta for a story at Bleacher Report. And he put it perfect. He's like, look, yes, I retired. It was my personal decision. But I'll be honest, like, there is something different about football. When you're a linebacker and like, if I don't signal to a teammate that this receiver's crackback blocking, like, my teammate is going to have his bell rung. He might be out cold. He might suffer an injury. Like, that pressure in real time in front of 70, 80,000 fans, it's intoxicating. It's an adrenaline rush that can't be duplicated in life anywhere. And I miss it. I love it. And Chris Borland is saying that.
He had mixed feelings about this. Did you get any sense from him that he regretted his decision?
I didn't. No, he's a really smart guy, and he was able. You mentioned, and you write this too in the book, how a lot of players come from situations where they're not forced to play the sport, but they're really good at it, and it can financially benefit their family, their families, and like.
Or they come from a place where it would be insane not to do it. Where everybody who can play football does, and that there's like peer pressure isn't even the right word. It's almost sort of like like community pressure. Like it's I just saw like yesterday I think so like the center for the Bears I guess is retiring. Okay,
Yeah, that's right. Drew
and
Dahlman.
He's played I believe 5 years, and I think that 5 years is when if you're invested for 5 years you're into the NFL pension program and all that stuff. I do wonder if there will be occasionally now examples of that where we see guys playing essentially exactly 5 years. Like to sort of get to the point where they will have the benefits of being, and maybe there'll be the guys like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers who have these super long careers, and then a lot of guys who have 5-year careers on purpose. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think that may be where it's going, and I love the way you put it in the question, chapter 9 of your book. You had a friend who would just cut his seatbelt out, right? He didn't want anything to do with his seatbelt.
Well, a guy in my town who did that, apparently. Yes.
A guy in your town. Yeah. And it sounds crazy, but then you're like, well, why do we let people swim? It'd be crazy to ban swimming at the ocean, and you can drown, right? A shark can eat you alive, whatever.
I mean, these things are all temporary. I mean, I don't think I ever wore a seatbelt in a car until I took driver's education. No one I knew wore their seatbelt, okay? Like you had to when you took driver's education. Then you got your license and nobody wore a seatbelt. I didn't, it never happened. Now that seems insane, right? It would be insane if every time I got in my car, or I did something to stop the beeping from happening so that I wouldn't have this seatbelt. It would just seem crazy. It seems crazy that somebody in my town would use a hacksaw to cut out the seatbelt, and yet it seemed equally crazy when I was growing up to wear a seatbelt for a 10-minute drive. Like if we were going somewhere for 10 minutes and you got in the car and someone put their seatbelt on, if it was the driver, you'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Can I trust you? Like you literally would trust a person less if they wore a seatbelt when they drove. So all these things, we talk about how crazy football can seem at times, or how crazy it might seem in the future, or how strange it was. Like we watch NFL films from the 70s, and there's footage of Terry Bradshaw gets sacked in a Raiders game, and I think John Matuszak just kicks him in the head, kicks him in the helmet, and there's no penalty. He just does it, and it's like we go oh, how could that have happened? Well, at the time, that was seen as he got away with one. It wasn't even perceived as crazy of a thing to have done.
Got away with one. It's so true, but also I think your point too is okay. The ocean isn't going to get outlawed because people enjoy to swim. So we're making that mental calculation. Okay, is it worth the risk? The enjoyment we get out of this activity, is it worth the risk? And when it comes to football, I mean, you go back and forth on this, you conclude that it is worth the risk, correct? How would you explain that?
Well, I would say this: you got to weigh every aspect of this. Okay, you have to weigh what's going to happen to the person in the best case scenario who plays football, and in the worst case scenario. You have to factor in the idea of how essential is this to society. If this was removed from society, what would be the loss? There would be some loss, but how great is that loss? You have to start thinking about things like, well, we as fans, someone like me, how complicit I am if I watch a football game and someone dies while they play. Like with the situation, with Hamlin, if he didn't die, but there was a period where we were about 24 hours. We were is this guy going to live?
I was there in Cincinnati. It was insane.
Very strange. It was a very strange night, and it was also strange how once it was realized that it was this arcane, very strange condition that wouldn't happen ever. Then it was oh, I guess everything is fine.
Yeah.
It's we just completely.
The NFL basically just stepped over his body and kept on playing.
Well, but he also did get up. The question is, what if he doesn't get up? But even if he doesn't get up. The fact that it was such a rare, the real, I guess, fear would be if someone were to die in a game directly due to a blow to his head. The most conventional kind of head trauma or whatever. But I guess what I was saying is you have to weigh all these things, sort of. You think about all these different ways to look at this. The involvement of the fans, the economic condition, you were talking before we started about Green Bay, the Green Bay Packer franchise. It's hard to imagine that city without the Packers. If the Packers don't exist there, what is Green Bay as a town? When I kind of weigh all those things. I will also do my ideas aren't necessarily standard. Like, I do perhaps give more value to the idea that entertainment and distraction is important. And that, like, because one thing when you talk about football like this, like, there could be somebody who'd listen to this podcast and they're like, these guys are talking about football. It's like, what's going on in Iran? We need to think about Iran right now. We shouldn't be talking about football. But that is kind of inverted logic, because why should we be thinking about Iran? Well, because that's affecting real people, right? Real lives are being impacted. Well, why do we care about those real lives? Because those lives have value. What gives life value?
Yeah.
And I think it is very possible to get value from the experience of just watching football as a fan. Like, it seems a little crazy to be like, well, you can reach self-actualization or whatever by watching the SEC. But in some ways you can, if it means something to you. We're all creating meaning in our life. So I think that, to me, is when I look at something like football, that, it's not a niche thing. It's a hyper object. It's like something that sort of encapsulates these huge swaths of the populace, particularly, weirdly, exclusively the American populace. It's not a global thing. So it means it has some sort of specific value to this country. I do think that has meaning, and I try to make that argument in this book. And it's a hard argument to make because there's many arguments against it, but,
That's such a dominant through line through football. And you get into it pretty soon in the first chapter. It's not like that. Noah Chomsky did an interview in 1992 that you reference, where he kind of takes the stance where, I have it right in front of me, talking about sports. It offers people something to pay attention to that's of no importance, that keeps them from worrying about things that matter to their lives. I remember in high school, I suddenly asked myself, why do I care if my high school team wins this football game? And then your counter argument, I guess, you kind of explained what he's getting at, but then, as you write, there's no reason to value life if we're not going to value living. Football, and particularly watching football on television, can be dismissed as wasteful and empty. But what that dismissal fails to grasp is that the best version of anything is the way most people find meaning in personhood. And and then you mentioned the Colts-Broncos Thursday night game, which was like, human centipede in football form. But we were all watching it that night.
Oh, yeah. The Chomsky quote I really remember because it's like it's a good argument and a bad argument at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's a good argument in which he says that he has this realization at one point. It's like, why is he being pressured to care about his high school football team? He's like, I don't even know the guys who play. I only go to this high school because that's where I live. Like, why am I sort of being forced to engage with this thing that doesn't matter to me? That's a reasonable argument. I understand that. But then he goes a little further and he's like, well, things like football, were invented to distract people from, like, the real issues. And I think that's wrong for two reasons. One, that's not the case. That's not why it happened. There is no sort of puppet master who created football so that we could, produce greater capitalism. That's just a made-up fear, kind of. But also, it's like, well, who is to say what is more important, really? Like, it's like, people want to simplify the morality of that question. That's sort of like, well, this is obviously important and this obviously is not. I don't think it's that simple. Like, I don't think it's that easy to sort of rank the meaning of things because it's very situational and meanings they're not, every meaning is different, so, yeah.
You're right. It's and it's an outlet, it's entertainment. That entertainment value will always be there. I don't know if you can speak to this too, because you played. I know for me, I don't know who I would be as a human being if I didn't play football from whatever, third grade to 1 year of college. It just, the things that this sport can give you, in my opinion, other sports cannot. You played football? Because as you write, you're like, over time, less and less people are going to play football, and that connection of actually participating in the activity, you believe it's going to fade, decade to decade to decade.
Well, see, on this point, we might disagree a bit because I did play football. I don't know necessarily if it was good for me psychologically over time. I'm not sure if it was because it meant so much to me and there were certain limitations that, you just naturally encounter, and those, the things when I think back on playing high school football, it is strange how the most present memories are the things that went wrong, like my failures. A dropped pass and one guy ran a double reverse one time, and I should have scored a touchdown, and I dropped that pass. I remember that drop much more than any touchdown I scored. When I think of being a punter, the main punt I remember is the one that was almost returned for a touchdown because I kicked a line drive to a guy who was good enough to field a line drive, and he got down to the 6, and I think I knocked it. I remember all these things, and I remember things about practice that they're not good memories, and I don't think that they necessarily build character. Although I don't know, maybe the fact that I remember them is proof that it did, and that the idea of building character is basically like the repository of negative memories that sort of spur you to act differently. But I'm not even sure. Like you say, maybe football is the only sport who can teach you certain things. I think in one way that there is some truth in that. I wouldn't say football is the only sport like this, but I think, football, combat sports, maybe hockey, very physical sports where there's a real risk of injury from other people, not just like spraining your ankle or blowing out your ACL. I do think that those things have a increasingly disappearing role in society, but a meaningful role in the sense that it is probably good for us to be reminded that the physical world exists and there are consequences to this.
Yeah.
When I talk about coaches and Brian Kelly and stuff like that, Brian Kelly was really troubling to me when I would see him scream at guys in their face. It just doesn't seem like something that should be happening in a modern world or whatever. But he is actually operating in a world that's not modern. He's working in a world where you can't talk your way out of being slower and weaker than someone. In our life, we can. We can succeed in life and have absolutely no encounters with violence or physicality. It's very possible. But on the football field, you can't. On the football field, it's almost like a return to the natural state of man. And I think that is, if something does keep football alive in a political sense, it will be that there is a real hunger, I think, in the world for that to still be available, to still be reminded that it's not, everything's not relative. Mm-hmm. Everything's not subjective. I mean, one thing about this book in general is that it's kind of against the idea of postmodernism, which when I was a younger person, I was just obsessed with. I wanted everything to be postmodern. Now I realize that in an entirely postmodern world, we're living sort of a fake reality. And football pushes us back to the real reality, the inescapable, hard reality of, muscle and bone and blood and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I guess what kind of pisses me off with the NFL is they fight that. It's like they almost are in denial of their own activity, and they don't want to own their violence, and it's smart in a way. You're trying to appeal to a large group, and you're trying to convince moms to let little Johnny play. But you kind of get at this later in the book too. I think we'll be in agreement here. I feel like that failure to just own what you are as a sport, it's going to hurt you down the road. You know what I mean?
Well, no, but we're talking. It is a very nuanced thing because, in a sense, the NFL, particularly college football too, but the NFL even more, exists in this state where it's we cannot stay the same size. We have to get bigger. The NFL always wants to expand. It wants to increase the amount of revenue it makes. It wants to increase the amount of salaries it's paying to its players. It wants to increase where the game is seen. Put a game in Wembley Stadium. Put a game in Brazil or all this stuff. And to do that, you do have to sort of fight its kind of, in some ways, true central nature. Like a smaller sport, say like rodeo or whatever. Guys are riding bulls and getting thrown off bulls and gored by bulls. Or bullfighting in Spain, I guess. Yeah. Or, even to a degree, NASCAR. There hasn't been a fatality in NASCAR for a while, but everyone knows that every NASCAR event could result in someone dying, in an instance, right? And once you say, well, this is part of it. This is part of what the game is. That's going to cut off the casual fan. The casual fan wants to feel like they're watching something that is violent, but no one's ever actually going to get hurt. Like, we need football to be physical and violent. Well, say whenever they make a rule change for the player safety. Like when they change the kickoff rule, right? So now we have this strange kickoff thing where the guys are 30 yards upfield, and it looks weird to, I'm sure, both of us, right? Like, hard to get used to that. As it turns out, it hasn't affected the game that much. May have actually made returns slightly more interesting. But when the initial fan sees that, like their natural reaction is to not like it. They might say they don't like it for aesthetics or it seems, illogical or whatever. But what they really don't like is the knowledge that this was done for player safety. That is, and it's not that they want to see guys get hurt, but they need that risk.
Right.
I think this is an underrated thing. It's like for something like football to be important. The comparison I always use in these things is like mountain climbing. Like if a guy's climbing K2, he does not want to die on that mountain. That's maybe the deepest fear he has. But for that to be meaningful, the risk has to exist. If there is zero risk of dying when you climb K2 or Mount Everest, many, many people would do it casually. And they'd be like, oh, what can happen, No one watches a football game as a blood sport, hoping to see someone get seriously hurt or killed or anything like that. But that has to be part of it to make the things that we like meaningful. Like downfield passing is it's a beautiful poetic thing, in part because there is a possibility that some strong safety is going to come across and just cut a guy in half, So so when we see these guys doing these incredible sort of athletic endeavors, we know there's risk. Like violence in football, while of course a problem, is part of what does give it meaning.
And do we need the NFL network? I guess it was ESPN in the 90s, but do we need the league itself, promoting jacked up clips and highlighting the head hunting? No, but you don't need to treat us like infants and patronize us and say it's safe. It's not safe, and that's okay, right? As long as there's blocking and tackling, there is an inherent violence that we all kind of know watching this thing until you stick the flags in everybody's belt.
Well, I mean, the jacked up thing, because that gets brought up a lot, right? We look back on that and we're like, that was kind of crazy. And it was kind of crazy, I suppose, to me because of one specific detail. They would not show a guy getting hammered if he actually got hurt. Like, if we saw a guy get hit so hard that his season ended, Tom Jackson and stuff was not like, he's jacked up, and now it's like they only showed the one where the guy sort of got up, or if he didn't get up, later on we realized he's okay. It was almost, no one thought this, they just thought people like seeing hits, but again, they want to show hits where the consequence is not that great. And now I think there's this idea that, the consequence actually comes later. That when, I think everyone has wondered this, it's like, what would have to happen for CTE to really scare people? And the example I would sometimes use is, Troy Aikman retired due to concussions. Now he's an analyst. If one season, suddenly, Troy Aikman can't talk anymore, can't remember things or whatever, it's like very, very obviously has some kind of dementia issue that just comes on like a thunderbolt, then I think people will be like, geez. But the opposite has happened. He seems fine. That's always the thing with CTE. It's clearly there are people who have it and are unaffected. There's got to be, because we only test it on guys we think might have it. So, of course, the test almost is always positive. Somebody dies, they slice their brains up, they look at the protein, they see that, this person has CTE. I would guess that there are some guys who they have CTE and we never know it. I think it would have been very interesting if they would have tested O.J. Simpson for CTE. What if he would have had just a profound case of it? Would we have to rethink everything about him? I don't know.
And the NFL's only getting bigger and bigger, and each TV deal gets just more insane and more insane. And I get the NFL, they have to, have Bad Bunny perform at halftime. He's the number one global artist, and then you got your hardcore fans that are pissed off about it, maybe, and don't enjoy it. So you're kind of, you're not straying from your base. Maybe they are taking their base for granted, but they have to keep getting bigger and bigger because you lay it out with the TV deals.
I mean, I feel like the NFL, the Super Bowl halftime show, is something that is almost willfully understood by people. Because they often say, like, well, why isn't Metallica playing this? Or, like, why don't we find an artist that seems in line with who we imagine is the typical football fan? But that's the complete opposite of what they want to do. Like, the person who's a football fan's already watching the game. They want something for the person who has no interest in football but is at a Super Bowl party to stop what they're doing, put their food down or whatever, and watch this window of time. Like, what we see at halftime of the Super Bowl is like, it's almost anti-football. And it's, but, like what you say, like the hardcore fan, like it seems baffling, right? Because they still sort of think that football belongs to them. That football is like this thing that's only for the people who care about this thing that's supposed to actually sort of, contradict what enlightened society likes. But the Super Bowl doesn't operate that way. The Super Bowl operates like a holiday. That like, that it's like, it's almost like a person is like, why is something disassociated from football, the halftime show of the Super Bowl? That's almost like a really religious person saying like, why at Christmas do we have like reindeer? Like that we don't need. There's no reindeer in the Bible or whatever. You're like, but that's not how it is. It's like we're trying to expand these things.
I get all of that. I wonder though. Adam Carolla has this theory that society in general is moving toward safe spaces and octagons. And what is there going to come to a point where the NFL is going to have to just embrace its octagon lifestyle and know it's not for everybody, but that is how it can exist beyond 2070.
Well, no, yes, beyond 2070, possibly. That might be what it is. But right now, they're not going to even get close to that. Like you were saying earlier, it's actually it was accurate and insightful. You say, like, they won't sort of accept that this is a violent thing. Like, you're trying to convince us it's not. They're trying to introduce like flag football and like women's football and stuff like this, almost to illustrate that this game can exist without contact or whatever. And maybe in their mind, they're like, well, if this event that I'm sort of speculating, if in their own mind, whatever they think could be like the cataclysmic event, they're like, well, maybe we can shift to this, right? We can just replace this with kind of like a less physical, like safe version of football. Maybe people. I think what you're describing is actually probably closer to what would happen, which is that it would become this thing that a little bit the way boxing is, or even more so, like, if he says like the octagon, like the way that was in the 90s, like with like Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock and those guys, where it was like they were constantly trying to have these fights, and like they'd have to move it out of a state because it would be banned suddenly in that state, so they have to move the thing to Kentucky or whatever. Like that might be closer to what this kind of far distant world of football is. Yeah. That it is really on like the margin of society. But then the bigger question, I mean, this is what makes football complicated, is like, if that happens, if football gets completely moved to the margins and the NFL is this thing that's like not in the center of the world, how do we have new players? Because it will end at the high school level. It will kind of dissipate at the college level. We'll only have pro football. So then it's like, well, we have to have like football academies. That's what it could end up happening. It's like in Florida and Georgia and Texas and stuff like that. There are some places where, kind of like the way we have tennis academies now, where kids are sent there when they're 10 because they show sort of potential in this, and then the sport is just their whole life. Like, I could see that eventually happening. That football becomes this thing that the game itself kind of looks the same. It might even look better in a way, but the participation will be this thin sliver of society. And that the majority of people watching it have no relationship to football at all, in part because that's already happening. I mean, it's like most of, like, I have many friends, many friends, and we all love football, and we talk about football constantly, and very few of them played. Very few. And many of them didn't really even have any friends in high school who played, or didn't even have a father who cared about it or played or whatever. It's like, I think that the personal relationship to football is going to disappear. And that sort of is, in some ways, like, to me, this future crisis I talk about, it's two things. One is economic, and that's, a totally different conversation. But the other one that's more complicated is the possibility that football will become something that, for most people, is just sort of a distracting thing to watch. That the idea of actually being involved with it in a personal level, it's not even like didn't happen. It's an impossibility. They would have never considered it. I mean, I think a lot of people who watch boxing are like that. I think a lot of people who like boxing or like MMA and stuff like that, there's no part of them that thinks that could have been me. Or if I would have had the opportunity to do that, I would have tried. Or I've ever met anybody like this. I mean, that's even the larger thing. It's not just I didn't do it. It's like I've never met someone like this, you know? And I wonder if that day is coming. You know?
Which is a horrifying thought for the 31 owners and, you know, the many in Green Bay and Roger Goodell. I mean, I don't know, have his henchmen been after you, Chuck? I mean, the way
well, you know, I will admit, I was wondering if, you know, obviously, you know, books are a small part of the world now, right? Like, you know, it's strange. I write this book, and then I do all these podcasts, and I think for most of the world, those podcasts are the relationship to the book. And if they listen to enough of these podcasts, in 5 years, it'll seem like they read the book. But like, I was kind of curious when somebody from the NFL or like anybody would just say something about this book. You know, that it was interesting or that they hated it or whatever. And I haven't heard anything. And I guess maybe I didn't expect you, but I was curious. I was curious what somebody who works in the NFL front office would think of this book, because in some ways, it doesn't really traffic in the traditional reasons people talk about why football is great. What people typically talk about when they talk about the greatness of football, it's like the community of the fans, and it's sort of like, you know, and you know, the emotion of it, and the fact that it can sort of make a young man become something he couldn't. And I'm not really that way. Like, I don't think about. I understand those feelings, but that's not how I think. I mean, I think of it sort of more in a kind of a distanced way, and sort of like a. I'm not sure. I'm not doing a good job of describing this, but because when you talk about this book, and I can tell you like it, and I love that you do. And for you, I think it is a more emotional thing, almost like football to you is almost more emotional than cerebral. Would you say that? Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, maybe the analogy isn't like, you know, drinking whiskey and looking at your football. So I feel like, Chuck, you came from another planet, and where the IQ is about 5 times higher than anybody here on Earth, and you're looking at this sport for the first time. Really, though. I mean, and you mentioned like people are going to feel like they read the book listening to this podcast. We are barely scratching the surface, everybody. Buy it, please. Like, I just listened to it. I'm going to get the hard copy and reread it. There is so much in here that I love, and we only have so much time. But
just tell the publicist to send you a book, because I appreciate you listen to it, but I didn't often use the footnotes. I didn't say the footnotes sometimes in the audio.
Okay.
So you need the physical book to get the footnotes, you know.
But we didn't
There's
even
a long
get to maybe
footnote
like
about like LSU and Old Miss's uniforms. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, and the that's true, and I love like the way that you would play football on video games, like punting, playing field position. Like,
yeah, I have a very conservative EA college football
very
style.
conservative.
Yeah.
But like the best part of the book may be the semantics of goat herding and the case you make for Jim Thorpe being the greatest ever. I love it because the way you describe time travel, it's a two-way street. This is what you wrote, and sorry I'm reading from your book so much, but we're just kind of dipping our toe in the water here. Greatness, like all subjective constructs, is relative. Isaac Newton, the inventor of calculus, would be flummoxed by any upper-level calculus class at present-day MIT. He might not be able to pass the course, but what must be likewise accepted is that many top math students currently at MIT, if born into the 17th century and forced to live a Newtonian existence, might never learn to count past the number 10. Time travel is a two-way street that fails in both directions. I think at one point when you're writing on Tom Brady, you're like, if he went back to Jim Thorpe's time, he'd want to kill himself. Like, very different eras.
Yeah. See, what that is an interesting chapter in the book, I think, because that probably in some ways has the most references to specific football players. In fact, you know, but it's really more about just the concept of greatness. Like, how should we think about greatness? And you know, there's a couple paragraphs where I sort of use it as a metaphor. I talk about the Beatles, but you know, That whole chapter could have been about the Beatles with a few paragraphs about Jim Thorpe. So even though that chapter does have maybe the most football content in a way, in some senses that is maybe the least about football in the specific, because it's kind of about the idea of like, well, how if we're going to consider anything to be the greatest of all time, what should be the criteria? Because the fact of the matter is, if we really go by who is the best at playing football, if that's the greatest player of all time, who's the most, if you were building a team from scratch to play the aliens or whatever, it would always be whoever is the best player right now. That is the nature of how time advances. That, the physicality and the technology and the training and all of these things, and the fact that you can sort of use the past as a guide, that makes, modernity sort of controls everything. But you can't look at it that way. You have to look at people measured against the other people they existed alongside, and what were the opportunities they had when that occurred. Yeah.
And there's no footage of Jim Thorpe.
The only footage of Jim Thorpe is you go to YouTube and look for Jim Thorpe. You see one clip, and it's actually Red Grange.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So how good was he? I mean, I've got Path by Lightning over there. I still have not read it, but I don't know really anything about his dominance. How dominant really was he for people who don't know?
Well, I mean, he
understand.
He was universally seen as the best player. He was the first, basically president of the NFL. It wasn't the NFL, pro football at the time. He was, the best runner, the hardest hitter, and the best kicker. And this is at a time when the idea of when does modern football begin? That's a tough question. Because my argument is that the greatest of all time is the earliest elite rendering of something. So Jim Thorpe is the earliest elite rendering of a football player playing a game that's still connected to the game we play now. So when Jim Thorpe is playing, it is 11 on 11. It's 10 yards for a first down. It's 6 points for a touchdown. There's passing. There's strategy. I kind of use that as the beginning of when football exists. I think a very good argument could be made that actually modern football doesn't begin until they stop playing both ways and they added face masks and we kind of look, the 50s basically, the 1950s. In which case, then I suppose Jim Brown is the greatest player of all time. But I make the argument for Thorpe. It's interesting. I think that people read that and they're either like, well, this makes sense the way it's argued, or they just find it completely fucking bad shit. It makes no sense to them. They're like, it's the complete opposite of what a logical person would say. But that's a lot of my writings that way. That's how a lot of the things I write end up being received. That people are either like, I guess I see that, or that's stupid.
I mean, there's definitely moments where I mean, maybe you're right. I don't think Colin Kaepernick will be in the Hall of Fame one day.
Well,
but maybe
I don't think he will. I think he probably will be.
That's what I'm saying. There's points I may disagree here and there.
But not for his on-field production.
Right.
That's not why it will happen.
That essay on race in the NFL is the best piece of writing I've ever read on the convergence of those two things.
Wow,
it's incredible.
That's very nice of you to say.
On greatness, though, I think he wrote at one point Randy Moss's peak was better than Jerry Rice's peak, and I think
for a play,
Yeah,
I mean, Jerry, the peak of Jerry Rice's career is shockingly long, and he was, if you're saying who is the greatest receiver of all time, there is no question. It is absolutely Jerry Rice. But the best football player I ever saw in my life with my eyes is Randy Moss on certain specific plays. I think for, if you're going to play for 10 years and you want the best receiver, you pick Jerry Rice. But if you're going to play for 10 seconds, you want Randy Moss. And that, to me, in some ways, is what I like, the idea of natural greatness. Yes. I just think it's such a stirring thing. I know we're supposed to reward the guy who works the hardest, puts the most time in, watches the most film, is the most committed, does all those things. If I was teaching my kid lessons on life, that's the kind of things you teach your kid, right? But as a fan, what is most incredible to me is the person doing something that, as far as I can tell, could never have been done before. or he's the only person who could ever do this. And were situations with Randy Moss like that, where he seemed so separate from every other person in the league that, it felt different to me. So, he's the best player I ever saw with my eyes for a moment. The best player I ever saw with my eyes for a time is probably Jerry Rice.
Leroy Butler came on this podcast a year, 2 years ago, and he went off on Randy Moss. It used like the same words as like Robert Smith. I think you referenced a quote of his. Like it was like Mike Tyson, where he's never heard defensive players talk about Randy Moss or talk about anybody like they do Randy Moss. That's the way Leroy describes him. You're terrified. You're haunted. I mean, you can be in the perfect position. It doesn't matter. He's Monday Night Football in the rain at Lambeau, tipping it to himself in a blowout win. But that idea of natural greatness being kind of mitigated through unnatural means, that's where it gets really fascinating too, is like defensive scheme and design, and the nature of football today it's trying to like boa constrict the Randy Mosses. We don't see those kind of players anymore.
Like one thing that I reference is like Bob Hayes, who played for the Cowboys in the late '60s and early '70s. He was the greatest deep threat in the league during that time, and he was somebody he ran track. He was the first, I think, person to run I think it was 100 meters in 10 seconds or 100 yards. Yeah. He was the very first. He was at one point the fastest man in the world, and that was when he became a pro football player. It immediately translated, because there were situations where he would just simply run past guys, and they would have to just shift everything to do. Now it's like zone defense. Especially the rise of these different shells and 2D, it's like we did all these things to mitigate that natural ability, or ways to sort of find a way to defense, just the option or the wishbone in these things. Like we're able to take those things away through strategic means, and as a consequence, greatness in a way matters slightly less. In part because there are so many great players now. There are so many people whose physicality qualifies them as kind of great and otherworldly, where in the past, that kind of singular greatness was often enough. Sometimes if you I think even going back to someone like Bo Jackson, that when he started playing for the Raiders then, there was this period where his power, they had a real limited number of plays for him. Like that famous game against the Seahawks, where he runs over Brian Bosworth. Like, it wasn't as though I think he had even absorbed the full playbook. They seemed to have a limited number of plays, but his power and his speed was just too much. It was like he could just, that was alone. I don't know if that would still be the case now. I don't know if a running back could dominate in that way anymore.
I remember thinking Reggie Bush is just going to light this NFL on fire. Remember him at USC? That you referenced it at one point. They're playing against Fresno State. It's like he's going to take over the league, and he was very good, but he didn't take over the league.
Yes, I mean I wrote a column for ESPN basically after that draft, being like the Houston Texans are idiots. Like, what are they like? How could they have passed on this guy? And it turns out that they were probably correct, and that Reggie Bush, he had some good years with the Saints. I mean, he definitely
caught 100 balls one year.
What he was able to do in college, simply because guys couldn't get him down, didn't really happen anymore. When he's playing that game against Fresno, it's it was almost like Fresno maybe didn't have a guy. If there was a tackling drill and they had to one-on-one tackle him, they maybe didn't have a guy on their roster who could tackle him. I mean, I'm sure if there's a guy from Fresno listening to this, he feels like, yeah, I could have. But it almost looked that way. Where when Bush moved to the NFL, it wasn't the case anymore. And you can't when I was a little kid, I was in this thing called the NFL Super Pro Club. And I got this little, they sent you this book. It was the illustrated NFL playbook or whatever. It gave you all this information about, kind of really taught me a lot about football. But one of the things I remember reading was a quote. I think it might have been from Bill Walsh or somebody like that, who kind of said you can think about football plays your whole life. You can spend your whole life designing brilliant football plays, but ultimately you can't make guys disappear. Like you can't come up with a play that the play itself is going to succeed. It's always going to be the pieces. And at the NFL level now, I mean that's part of the. In some ways, like one thing I don't love about the NFL is how most teams fundamentally do play the same.
Yeah. Oh, just lost your volume there,
Sorry,
Chuck.
how about this? Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
I was saying it's like at college, and this is maybe disappearing a bit too, but like there's real diversity between how teams play in the South and the West Coast and the Midwest and stuff like that. A smaller program will still run like the flex bone or something, or they like, but as the talent becomes to equalize, and this is going to happen in college football, it's already happened in the NFL, that when the talent is kind of equal across the board, you almost sort of simplify it down to like what is the most reasonable neutral set, like which now in the NFL for the most part is one running back, a slot receiver, kind of like I guess it would be called like 11, personnel. At the college level, a lot of times you see teams basically just kind of play nickel every down, like they just play nickel. That's what they do now, and that's I don't love that, but that's just sort of the nature of improvement,
I remember listening to that part, taking the dog for a run out here. I almost came to a complete stop because I was so bummed out. It's so true. Like those days of, I'm thinking Nebraska, Tommy Frazier in the '90s running the option, and it's like just dominant. You knew what you're going to get out of that Nebraska offense.
Or even like I don't think this ever happened, but I remember like the idea of like, what if there's a bowl game and like Paul Johnson's coaching Georgia Tech and Mike Leach is coaching Washington State and they play.
Oh,
like that was like
incredible.
the dream. Yes, like that's what, like the dream scenario, right? Like the two ends of the spectrum are like and that seems less and less. You still see it a little bit with the military academies, I guess. Like Air Force this year and Navy this year, like they play differently than a lot of the other programs. Sometimes you'll watch a Sun Belt game or a MAC game and you see people doing stuff that nobody else is doing. But now in the SEC, in the Big Ten, teams are kind of playing the same way. I mean, Iowa punts more. That's the biggest difference. And also, it's like weird. It's like Vanderbilt can be good or whatever. Or Indiana can be great. It's like those are the weird things now.
Yeah, it's almost like even bigger than football. You look at like sports logos. They're all just circular and boring and bland. And then you go to like corporate logos for different businesses and different industries. Everything's kind of becoming the same. I wish we could just bust out. I want a bold coach somewhere at some university to just try something we've never seen before and for it to excel.
Well, what you're talking about, that's that's almost more of a social issue or whatever. But I mentioned the Bears earlier. Like I've heard the Bears are trying to get a new stadium, maybe even an indoor stadium. Soldier Field is one of the last places where the name of the stadium isn't some kind of branding opportunity. And it's bizarre it used to be, I don't want to sound like 1,000 years old, but like Soldier Field, Mile High Stadium, and these places, like the thing, or in the NBA, how there'd be like the Spectrum and the Mecca and the Omni and all these kind of weird words, but yet somehow we're so much more evocative of something as opposed to say like, AT&T, Diet Pepper, like it's like that's less meaningful. It sort of reminds you that this is really just this way to make money. And like nobody, even though we know that, we don't want to be reminded of that, right? You don't want to constantly. Yeah. That's why, I think some people say, why don't they just put ads on the players' uniforms? Because maybe there could be less commercials, or there'd be a new way to add revenue, and that will probably happen. That happens in soccer, but yet every time you see that, it's kind of a reminder that this is really it's not that different than watching Full House as far as TV is concerned. They just want you to watch this,
Yeah, I mean, the NBA is there. They got patches all over their uniforms, yes. It seems. And I think you say, the NBA is trending a darker direction ahead of the NFL here. I
love that, as a sport itself, as a player, basketball meant more to me, in part because I was just better at it, I think, but also you can have a real kind of deep personal relationship with basketball by yourself, and I say that, and yet the NBA often makes me mad. Like there's a game coming on. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna watch this, and like 4 guys aren't playing or whatever, Or they don't want to. They don't want to play on Christmas. They don't want to play in the All-Star game. It's like the season's too long. It just drives me crazy in a way. Like I find myself getting angry at the NBA sometimes for just offering what it is. That does not happen to me with football as much. Football delivers the product. And also because of this violence and stuff, like even a preseason game can be interesting. Not maybe in the first quarter, but certainly in the fourth quarter when guys are trying to make the roster. Like they're not coasting. If they coast, they're gonna get busted in half. It's like
Right.
I mean, football, a bad football game is still watchable in a way no other bad version of a sport is. Like a bad NBA game is terrible to watch. But like you mentioned that they always criticize Thursday night football because the teams are in a short week and they can't prepare and those things. I'm really glad there's Thursday night football. I look forward to watching those games,
And you wrote this. I mean, that 11 minutes of action is real. Like the fact that you've got 11 minutes through the course of a game of pure action and enough time in between those plays to, mentally digest as much as you can, talk about it with your buddies, look ahead to the next play. The pace, it is all accidental, but the pacing of football.
It is, yeah. It's just
is unlike anything.
And that's something that took me a long time to realize. When I say I've thought about football for 45 years unconsciously and then very consciously for 20, I think that my understanding that semiotics, I guess is the word you use, like the formal way football is played, the way it is presented on TV, is perfect. I would have thought at the time in my life because we're so socialized to believe that if you watch a sport, you should want nonstop action, right? You should want that. That's what we should. It seems reasonable to say that. Well, I'm watching something that's interesting for the most interesting parts. I'm watching something entertaining for the most value of entertainment. But that's not really how the mind works. Like we have I think that we sometimes forget that let's say humans have lived for 250,000 years or whatever. Say. Well, for 249,900 of those years, there was no visual stimulus like television. Like if you saw a tiger, that meant there was a tiger there. Okay, so now over the last 120 years or whatever, 100 years, we've gotten totally used to the idea that if we see something, it's not actually there. Like no part of me is looking at you and I'm thinking oh, I wonder if he's in a window. It's like, I know you're somewhere else, Our mind understands that what we see on television is unreal, but I don't know if our bodies do. I don't know if our internal biological, the deep lizard part of us is ready for this. And I think the way football is structured allows that to kind of flourish because we see this thing and then we have some time to sort of disengage from it, sort of have our own thoughts, kind of put it in the context to understand it, and then re-engage. Like that, to somebody listening to this, they'll be like, that's not how it is when I watch football. This is not how it is. Well, it might be. You just because you're not aware of it doesn't mean it's
I just don't know. This was amazing. Chuck, thanks so much.
You said so many nice things about my book. I really appreciate that, man. I like what you're doing, so thanks a lot for having me on.
Oh, no, the pleasure is all here, and everybody out there watching, listening, please do yourself a favor. Buy the book. You'll read it in just a few days. It flies because you can't put it down. It's incredible. I mean, you're going to look at the sport in ways that you didn't even know existed. So thanks for pouring yourself into all of these various essays in football.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.